The sun was sinking low over the frontier town of Red Hollow, staining the horizon in shades of fire and blood. Dust swirled along the main street, clinging to boots, coats, and wagon wheels. The town breathed like a tired old man, slow, heavy, and always waiting for something bad to happen. In the saloon, the piano player tapped a broken tune, drowned out by the clatter of glasses and the rough laughter of ranch hands who'd spent too much time with whiskey. It was here that Jack Callahan walked in, tall, broad-shouldered, his face weathered from years of gun smoke and solitude. His gray hat cast a shadow over eyes that had seen too much death and too little mercy. The crowd didn't welcome him with cheers, but with silence, the kind that follows a man who carried a reputation heavy as his colt on his hip. They said Jack once rode with the most feared posse west of the Pecos. They said he had buried more men than he cared to count. What they didn't say, because no one truly knew, was that he had buried his heart the day his wife and unborn child were taken from him in a raid. Since then, Jack lived not as a man, but as a shadow. He ordered a whiskey, neat. The glass trembled slightly in his scarred hand, though not from fear. Jack had fought every kind of man the frontier could throw at him, but there was no fighting the emptiness that hollowed him from the inside. He didn't drink for pleasure. He drank because it reminded him he was still alive, even if sometimes he wished he wasn't. That was when he heard it, the sharp slap of flesh against flesh. A woman's cry cut through the saloon like a knife. Jack turned, eyes narrowing. Near the far table, 3 men cornered a young woman, their laughter sick and mean. One of them, a brute with a scar running down his neck, had just struck her, knocking her hat to the floor. The woman was unlike any Jack had seen in Red Hollow. Her auburn hair fell loose over her shoulders, her eyes fierce even as her lip bled. She wasn't dressed like a saloon girl, nor like a farmer's wife. There was something in her bearing, pride, fire, and grief wrapped in a single glance, that set her apart. She struggled against the men, shoving one back even though she was hopelessly outmatched. Jack didn't want to get involved. Not again. He'd spent years keeping his distance, walking away from other people's fights. But something in that woman's eyes stopped him cold. Maybe it was the defiance. Maybe it was the shadow of sorrow he recognized too well. Or maybe it was fate, dressed in dust and blood. He stood slowly, his chair scraping the floor. The saloon grew quiet, the piano stuttering to a halt. Jack walked toward the men, each step measured, deliberate. His hand brushed the butt of his Colt, though he hadn't drawn it yet. "Let her go," Jack said, his voice low but carrying like a storm rolling in from the hills. The brute with the scar sneered. "And who the hell are you to tell me what to do, stranger?" Jack's gaze didn't waver. "I'm the man who'll put you in the ground if you don't." For a moment the saloon held its breath. Then the brute laughed, ugly and sharp, but his hand twitched near his gun. The mistake cost him. Jack moved faster than the eye could follow. In one fluid motion, his Colt was drawn and pressed to the man's forehead. "Try me," Jack whispered. Silence. The brute's friends backed away, muttering curses, not willing to gamble their lives against the legend of Jack Callahan. The brute, pale and sweating, finally raised his hands and stepped back. Jack holstered his weapon, but his eyes never left them until they slunk out of the saloon like whipped dogs. The woman adjusted her torn sleeve, her breathing unsteady but her chin high. She turned to Jack, eyes sharp, guarded. "I didn't need your help," she said, her voice firm though trembling underneath. Jack gave her a look that was equal parts tired and amused. "Maybe not, but you got it anyway." Their eyes locked for a moment longer, the air between them thick with unspoken words. The woman finally extended her hand. "Clara Monroe," she said. Jack hesitated, then shook it. Her grip was strong for someone who had just taken a blow. "Jack Callahan," he answered. Her eyes widened slightly. She'd heard the name. Everyone had. But instead of fear, there was curiosity in her gaze. "Well, Jack Callahan," she said softly, "maybe fate put you in my path for a reason." Jack almost laughed at that, but the sound died in his throat. He didn't believe in fate, not anymore. Fate had stolen everything from him. And yet, something about Clara's words lingered like the taste of whiskey after the glass was empty. He watched as she left the saloon, her steps proud despite the bruise forming on her cheek. Jack knew he should let her go. She was trouble. Anyone could see it. Trouble meant pain, and pain meant remembering all the things he had tried to forget. But as the saloon doors swung closed behind her, Jack felt a pull he hadn't felt in years. The kind of pull that made a man pick up his gun and ride into storms he knew he might not survive. And somewhere deep inside the hollowed-out shell of his soul, Jack Callahan felt the faintest spark of something he thought long dead. The night after the saloon fight was restless. Jack Callahan lay in his cabin on the outskirts of Red Hollow, staring at the rafters while the coyotes howled across the plains. He told himself it wasn't his problem. He had stepped in, done what needed to be done, and that was the end of it. Yet Clara Monroe's eyes haunted him, eyes that carried fire and sorrow in equal measure. The next morning, as Jack saddled his horse, he spotted her again. Clara was at the edge of town helping a woman whose wagon wheel had broken. She worked with sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, her hands steady and strong. She didn't ask for help. She didn't wait for kindness. She just did what needed to be done. Jack almost turned away, but Clara glanced up and caught him watching. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she gave the faintest nod, as though acknowledging an invisible thread that now tied their paths together. Later that afternoon, Jack found himself at the blacksmith's, shoeing his horse when Clara approached. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed hesitation. "You didn't have to step in last night," she said. "Could have fooled me," Jack replied, not looking up. "Seemed like you needed it." Clara crossed her arms. "Men like that don't scare me. I've dealt with worse." Jack finally looked at her. "That so?" Something flickered in her expression, a shadow of pain, quickly hidden. Jack knew that look. It was the same one he saw in the mirror every morning. He didn't press her, but Clara spoke anyway, as if the words had been burning her from the inside. "My family owned a small ranch north of here," she began, her voice low. "We weren't rich, but we worked hard. My father raised cattle. My mother baked bread for half the county. Then they came. A gang looking for land, money, power. When my father refused, they burned the ranch, shot him where he stood. My mother didn't survive the fire. My little brother, Her voice broke. She turned away, blinking hard. "I buried them myself." Jack swallowed, his throat dry. He didn't ask who they were. He could guess. The frontier had no shortage of men who believed bullets could buy them an empire. "I've been chasing justice ever since," Clara continued. "Or revenge. Some days I can't tell the difference, but I know their leader's still out there, and I won't rest until he's in the ground." Her words struck Jack like a hammer. He saw himself in her rage, in her grief. He remembered the night he lost his wife, Sarah, and their unborn son. The night when fire and gunpowder had turned his world to ash. He remembered how he had hunted the men responsible, killing until the blood no longer brought peace, only emptiness. "You think killing him will make it better?" Jack asked quietly. Clara's eyes flared. "It'll make it right." Jack didn't argue. He knew better. Vengeance wasn't a fire you put out. It was one that consumed you until nothing was left. Still, he couldn't bring himself to tell her not to fight. She had already lost everything. He understood too well that sometimes revenge was the only thing keeping a person alive. Over the next few days, Jack and Clara crossed paths more often. He found himself repairing her saddle when the leather gave way. She patched his arm when a wild Mustang threw him into a fence. They spoke little, but each silence between them carried weight, like an unspoken understanding that neither was truly alone anymore. One evening, they sat by the river that cut through the valley. The sunset painted the water gold, and for a moment the world seemed almost peaceful. Clara skipped a stone across the surface, her reflection rippling in the current. "You carry ghosts," she said softly, not looking at him. Jack's jaw tightened. "We all do. Yours seem heavier than most." Jack took a long breath, the kind that felt like swallowing glass. "I had a wife, Sarah. She was everything good in me. 5 years ago, bandits raided our ranch. I buried her and the son she never got to hold." His voice caught, but he forced himself to continue. "Since then, I've been empty, just drifting, fighting, drinking, trying not to feel." Clara's hand brushed his, tentative but steady. "You're still here," she said. "That means something." Jack looked at her, really looked, and saw not just her grief, but her strength. Clara Monroe wasn't a woman broken by tragedy, she was a woman forged by it. And for the first time in years, Jack felt the faintest pull of something dangerous. Something he'd sworn never to feel again. Hope. But as the wind carried the distant sound of riders on the horizon, both of them knew peace wouldn't last. The past was coming for them, and it would test whether the fragile bond forming between them could survive the storm. The following weeks in Red Hollow blurred into a fragile rhythm. Jack Callahan still kept to himself, but more and more he found Clara Monroe at his side. She wasn't like the women he'd known in saloons or on lonely trails. Clara had grit, fire, and a stubborn refusal to be cowed by the harshness of the frontier. One afternoon, Clara walked into the general store where Jack was trading pelts. She carried herself with quiet determination, but Jack could see the way townsfolk whispered behind her back. "That's the widow who lost her family," one muttered. "She'll bring trouble here, mark my words," another added. Clara heard them all, but her chin lifted higher. Jack admired her for that. He knew too well what it was like to carry a reputation that weighed heavier than any saddlebag. Outside the store, Jack offered her a hand up onto her horse. She hesitated, then asked softly, "Why do you keep helping me?" Jack adjusted his hat, avoiding her eyes. "Maybe because I know what it's like when the world turns its back." For a moment their hands lingered together, the simple touch sparking something neither dared to name. That night the two rode out beyond the town, chasing a rumor that rustlers had been spotted near Clara's ruined ranch. The moon hung low, casting silver light across the prairie. Clara dismounted near the charred remains of her childhood home. Ashes still clung to the ground, though years had passed. She knelt, touching the blackened earth as if searching for her family's presence. In the silence. Jack stood a few steps back, watching her shoulders shake. He wanted to say something, anything, but words felt hollow. Instead, he removed his hat and bowed his head. Sometimes silence was the only prayer that mattered. When Clara finally turned to him, her eyes glistened, but her voice was steady. "They took everything from me, but they won't take my soul, not while I can fight." Jack stepped closer. "And you won't fight alone." The admission hung between them, heavier than any promise. Clara's lips parted as if to respond, but before either could speak further, a gunshot cracked the night air. The bullet struck the ground near Jack's boots, spraying dirt. Instinct took over. He shoved Clara down behind a broken fence post, drawing his Colt in one fluid motion. From the shadows of the tree line, riders emerged, their faces masked. rifles glinting in the moonlight. "Looks like we found ourselves the Lady Monroe," one of them sneered. "Boss'll pay double for her." Jack's eyes narrowed. The gang. Clara's past had caught up. He fired a warning shot, sending the riders scattering for cover. The night erupted into chaos, horses screaming, bullets splitting the air, wood splintering under gunfire. Jack and Clara crouched behind the ruins, returning fire with grim determination. Clara snatched up a fallen rifle, her hands steady despite the danger. "You can shoot?" Jack asked, startled. Clara's eyes burned with defiance. "My father taught me, before they killed him." She fired, dropping one of the riders clean off his horse. Jack couldn't help the flicker of admiration. Even in the middle of hell, Clara Monroe was no victim. She was a fighter. But there were too many of them. For every man they pushed back, more circled around. Jack felt the old cold calculation settle over him, the knowledge that survival was unlikely. He glanced at Clara, hair wild, eyes blazing, the very image of defiance. And for the first time in years, he felt fear. Not for himself, but for her. "Clara," he muttered, reloading fast. "If this goes bad, run." She shook her head fiercely. "I didn't come this far to run. If I die, it'll be fighting beside you." The words struck Jack harder than any bullet. For a man who had spent years drowning in solitude, the idea of someone choosing to stand with him, even at the cost of her life, was both terrifying and intoxicating. The gunfire thundered, and the prairie night burned with violence. Yet somewhere beneath the smoke and chaos, something unshakable had been born. A bond stronger than fear, forged in fire and blood. Jack Callahan and Clara Monroe were no longer just two broken souls crossing paths. They were partners, bound by pain, by vengeance, and by a love that neither dared to name, but both already felt burning in their bones. And as the riders regrouped for another charge, Jack realized the truth. This wasn't just Clara's fight anymore. It was his. The prairie night had turned into a battlefield. Gunfire echoed through the ruins of Clara's ranch, smoke rising in thin streams under the cold moonlight. Jack Callahan fired until his revolver clicked empty, then switched to his knife, driving back a rider who got too close. Clara reloaded with practiced hands, covering his flank, her hair flying wild in the gun smoke. For a moment it seemed they might hold. Two of the masked riders lay dead in the dirt. Another's horse bolted into the hills. But then came the whistle, a sharp, shrill command that froze the air. Out of the shadows rode a man larger than the rest, shoulders like an ox, beard black as coal, and eyes that gleamed with cruelty. "Enough!" he roared. His men fell back instantly, forming a ring around the ruins. The leader dismounted with deliberate slowness, as though certain of his victory. His boots crunched on the blackened soil. Clara's face went pale. Her rifle trembled in her grip. "It's him," she whispered. "Jeb Rawlins." Jack's gut twisted. He had heard the name before. A ranch burner, a murderer, a man whose cruelty was legend. If Clara's past had a face, it was this one. Rawlins smiled, a jagged line of broken teeth. "Well, well, the little Monroe girl. Thought you'd hide forever? No one runs from me." Clara raised her rifle, but Jack placed a hand on the barrel, steady but firm. There were too many of them. Rawlins's eyes slid to Jack. "And who's this? Some hired gun, or maybe just another fool looking to die?" Jack said nothing. His silence was answer enough. The standoff broke in an instant. Rawlins barked an order, and two men rushed Clara from behind. She fought like a wildcat, kicking, striking, even biting, but they dragged her down. Her scream cut through Jack like a blade. "Clara!" Jack surged forward, but three rifles leveled at his chest. The gang leader raised his hand lazily. "Not yet. Let him watch." Jack's Colt was half raised when a rifle butt slammed into his skull. White pain flared, the world tilting sideways. He hit the dirt hard, blood running warm down his temple. Through the haze, he saw Clara pinned, her wrists bound, her eyes burning with rage and terror. "Leave her!" Jack roared, struggling against the men holding him. "Take me instead!" Rawlins crouched, his foul breath hot in Jack's face. "You already had your chance to die, stranger. Tonight you live, so you can feel what it's like to lose everything." Jack's fists clenched, helpless fury shaking his body. For years he had carried his own ghosts, but this was worse. Watching Clara dragged away while he lay broken in the dirt felt like losing Sarah all over again. As the gang mounted up, Clara's voice rose above the chaos. "Jack!" she cried, her voice fierce despite the ropes around her wrists. "Don't give up, you hear me? Don't you dare give up!" The thunder of hooves swallowed her words as the riders disappeared into the night, carrying her into darkness. Jack was left alone among the ashes, bleeding, broken, his heart torn open. For a long moment he lay still, staring at the stars, listening to the silence after the storm. Then slowly, painfully, he pushed himself to his knees. His vision swam, his body screamed, but his soul burned with a fire he thought long dead. They had taken Clara, just as others had once taken Sarah. But this time he swore he would not fail. Jack Callahan rose in the ruins, gripping his revolver with bloodied hands. His voice was low, a growl against the night. "God help every last one of you, I'm coming." Jack Callahan rode through the night like a man possessed. His head still throbbed from the rifle blow, but he didn't care. The only thing that mattered was the trail of hoofprints leading into the hills. He pushed his horse harder, blood pounding in his ears. Clara's last words echoing over and over. "Don't you dare give up." By dawn, he spotted the gang's camp in a canyon where the cliffs trapped the morning light. Smoke from a dying fire curled into the air. Jack dismounted, checking his revolver, his knife, and the shotgun slung across his back. He was 1 man against 10, but he had been outnumbered before, and this time he had something to fight for. From the ridge above he saw Clara. She was tied to a post, wrists bound, but her head was high, eyes blazing with defiance even in chains. Rawlins paced in front of her, barking orders at his men. Jack's teeth clenched. He wasn't going to wait, not another second. He slipped down the ridge, using the rocks for cover. One guard leaned against a boulder, rifle in hand. Jack struck fast and silent, dragging the man into the shadows and leaving him crumpled in the dirt. Another man wandered too close, one crack of Jack's knife, and he fell without a sound. But stealth could only last so long. A shout went up when one of the gang spotted the bodies. Gunfire erupted, bullets sparking against stone. Jack dove behind a wagon, returning fire with deadly precision. Each shot found its mark. Years of grief had sharpened him into something more than just a drifter. He was vengeance in flesh. Clara struggled against her ropes, yelling through the chaos. "Jack, behind you!" He spun, firing just in time to drop a man who had crept up with a blade. The fight turned into a storm, dust rising, men screaming, guns roaring until the canyon echoed like thunder. Finally, only one man remained. Jeb Rawlins. The outlaw leader stepped forward, revolver in hand, sneering through the smoke. "You should have stayed down, Callahan. Now you'll die like the rest of your family." The words were a blade twisting in Jack's chest, but they gave him focus. He leveled his Colt. The 2 men circled each other in the dust, the world narrowing to a single heartbeat. Rawlins fired first. Jack felt the bullet graze his arm, hot blood running down. He answered with his own shot, clean, true. Rawlins staggered, clutching his chest, then collapsed into the dirt, his eyes wide with disbelief. The canyon went silent. Jack dropped his revolver and rushed to Clara, cutting her free. She collapsed into his arms, trembling but alive. For a moment neither spoke, just the sound of their breathing and the wind whispering through the rocks. Finally, Clara whispered, "You came." Jack's voice broke as he answered, "I'll always come." They sat together as the sun rose over the canyon, painting the sky in fire and gold. For years, Jack had lived only for ghosts. But now, holding Clara, he felt something stronger than vengeance. Stronger than pain. Hope. In the days that followed, Clara chose not to leave Red Hollow. She rebuilt her ranch with Jack at her side, the blackened ruins slowly giving way to fresh wood and new life. The townsfolk, once wary, began to see them differently. Two broken souls who had found strength in each other. Jack knew his scars would never fully heal, and Clara carried her own shadows. But together they weren't just survivors, they were building something worth protecting, and whenever the coyotes howled at night, Jack would hold Clara close and whisper the truth he had once buried in silence. "You're not alone anymore. Not ever again." Seasons passed in Red Hollow. What was once a ghost of a ranch began to breathe again. Fences stood where weeds had grown wild, fresh lumber framed a new barn, and fields of wheat bent gently in the wind. Neighbors who had once whispered about Clara Monroe's cursed past now rode out to lend a hand, bringing seed, nails, and strong backs. Slowly the land healed, just as its people did. Jack Callahan had never thought he would belong anywhere again. For years he'd wandered like a shadow, haunted by Sarah's memory, convinced his heart was a graveyard where nothing could grow. But Clara proved him wrong. Her laughter in the mornings, the determination in her eyes, the way she refused to let the past define her, all of it pulled him back from the edge. Some nights, as the fire crackled low, Clara would sit with him on the porch, her head resting on his shoulder. "Do you ever wonder," she asked once, "why life broke us down just to bring us together?" Jack thought about it long before answering. Maybe that's what love is out here. It's not about perfect beginnings. It's about surviving the storms and still finding someone worth standing beside. The words settled between them like a vow. Their story spread quietly through the territory. Folks began to speak of Clara not as a victim, but as a woman who had faced hell and rebuilt her life with grit and grace. They spoke of Jack, the loner who had carried too much sorrow, and how he found redemption not through revenge but through love. Together, they became a symbol that even in the roughest land, where bullets flew and graves came cheap, something tender could still take root. Years later, travelers passing through Red Hollow would see the ranch standing tall against the horizon. They'd hear tales of the gunfight in the canyon, of the outlaw Rawlins who fell, and of the woman he once tried to break but never could. And they'd see the truth written not in the stories but in the way Jack and Clara looked at each other, as if every day was a second chance they refused to waste. Their love was not soft. It was forged in gun smoke and grief, tested by fire and loss. But it was real, and it lasted. Because in the end, the West was never just about who was fastest with a gun or who owned the most land. It was about who had the courage to hold on, to hope, to love, to each other. And long after the dust of Red Hollow settled, that was the legacy Jack Callahan and Clara Monroe left behind. A reminder that no matter how hard the world tries to break you, love can build something stronger.